Meditation is quite safe. Tantra is not so safe. And that's one of the reasons why Tantra remains so hidden.
Hello and welcome, fellow human. My name is Zachary Stockill, and you are listening to Humans in Love, a podcast that looks at culture, relationships, and personal development from unconventional perspectives. Join me as I dig into the question of how people like you and I might get more out of life and love. Thanks for being here. When you hear the word Tantra, what comes to mind? What do you think of? What are the mental images that come up for you? If you're anything like a lot of people, the associations might not be entirely positive, owing, I would say, to a lot of the people involved in the Neo-Tantra scene, but certainly not exclusively Neo-Tantra. To my mind, Tantra is one of the world's great spiritual traditions, and also possibly the most poorly represented. I mean, if you Google Tantra, and by the way, I'm by no means an authority on Tantra. I'm speaking primarily as a student. But if you Google Tantra, you find a whole lot of crap in my mind. There's a whole lot of charlatans. There are many people indulging in what I call performative spirituality, people pretending they're having these mystical experiences and trying to sell themselves as gurus. There's a lot of snake oil. It's not all pretty. Certainly I'm generalizing here, but there's a lot of it, I think if you Google it, you'll find that way. And so a lot of people still snicker and laugh and have kind of weird negative impressions of what Tantra is. I remember Sting, of Sting and the Police fame, catching a whole lot of flack for admitting that he was interested in Tantra back in the 90s. People just have a lot of negative impressions of Tantra, and to a large extent I can understand why. But to my mind, the core teachings, the core principles, the core practices of Tantra are incredibly valuable and possibly more relevant than ever and more useful than ever as I speak to you today in 2018. I would say particularly for anyone interested in monogamy, anyone interested in maintaining a long-term exclusive relationship, Tantric principles can be extremely, extremely valuable. I've found that in my own life, and I've read many, many accounts of people with similar experiences. So what is Tantra? This is a question that I don't feel at this point entirely qualified to answer, so I wanted to have someone on the podcast who could. My guest today is Uriel Yariv. Uriel is an Israeli psychologist, Tantra teacher, and all-around interesting human being. He is currently one of my teachers here in Chiang Mai at the yoga/Tantra school he co-founded called Misuse Yoga. And over the past 6 months, as I've really tried to dive deep into Tantra, deeper I should say, I've found his teachings to be funny and pithy and to the point and unpretentious. And I really value his take on all these things. And his teachings have brought enormous value to my life. And I thought that a wider audience could really benefit from spending some time with him as well. So not long ago, I went to Misuse Yoga here in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and we sat down for this conversation. Part 1 of which you'll hear today, Part 2 you will hear next week. But if you have any interest whatsoever in Tantra, in maintaining a long-term relationship, particularly for the guys listening, if you have any interest in multiple male orgasms, I think you're really going to want to stick around and listen to my conversation with Uriel Yariv. Before we get started, I'll remind you that ratings and reviews are absolutely crucial for a podcast's success. So if you're enjoying Humans in Love and you'd like me to continue making new episodes, please go to Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice and leave a rating and a review. Without any further ado, I present to you part 1 of my conversation with Uriel Yariv. If someone comes up to you and asks, what is Tantra? What comes to mind? What would you tell them?
So the most important, or the aspect which stands to the eye the most about Tantra, is that it aims to bring the spiritual in the profane. It's aimed to live a life which is having all the characteristics of an ordinary life, with a job, with a relationship, with all the interactions with the world, and still to aspire and to practically make that life divine and godly. Yeah? And this is the essence. And the tantric practices, they are meant for that. If you want to stay in the world and yet live the same spiritual state that a monk lives, Tantra is the best path for that. Not easy, but the best.
And when you say divine, what does that word mean to you? Because, like, again, these words, a lot of people have different ideas of what they mean. What does that word mean to you?
Yes, it is like the, if we want to take it from here, it is like to the peak of excellence. Yeah, there is, you love to watch television, but you love your favorite food more than that. And you love your friends more than you love your favorite food, but you love your kids more than you love your friends, and you love your wife more than that. And that love can, if we continue that, most people stop with the wife or the husband. If we continue that, we would attain this excellent love, this perfect love. That's divine love. And you care in the same way. You care about your dog, you care about that, and then you really, really care about your kids. And if you take that care even higher, that would be divine care. So we have this capacity of excellence inside of us. The same what we did with love and with care, you can do with wisdom. You can do with intuition. Once you reach that level of perfection, there is something divine. Some artworks, Michelangelo or something, they portray that. Mozart. They portray, it's no longer just a piece of music, or it's divine. It's breathtaking. This kind of upliftment, if we want to take the divine from down upwards. So that would be a close definition.
And where does, again, even just using the word Tantra, there's many different schools and different ways that people practice things under the label of Tantra. But in your view, where does Tantra come from in terms of Hinduism, Buddhism, wherever? Like, what are the origins of this way of being in the world?
So archaeologically, the first findings of tantric practices, tantric hymns, and so forth, is about 3,300 BC, so 5,300 years ago, very, very old, in Pakistan, in the Indus Valley. Harappa is the archaeological site. And yes, the origin of Tantra was somehow growing side by side with Hinduism. Is Tantra the father of Hinduism, or is in Hinduism the father of Tantra? Not clear, and not so. Tantra didn't get to be an institute. It stayed somehow very free on the organization level. And in times, with the growth of Buddhism, we have Tantric Buddhism, and Tantra and Buddhism just mixed. And if you look at Tantric Buddhism and at Hindu Tantrism, they're also mixed. They share the same deities, even. So Tantra developed side by side with the traditions of India and later Tibet and the Far East in general. And these are the origins. It had certain periods of blossoming, certain periods where it was like now, mostly undercover. Yes, these are the origins.
And what about the foundational texts or figures? Like Buddhism had the Buddha, Christianity had Christ. Are there any comparable figures in Tantra?
Yes. The old Tantrics, they stayed anonymous. The writers of the oldest Tantric texts, they are the 64 Tantras. We don't have all of them now. We have 30-something. Some of the Tantras refer to other Tantras which are simply, unfortunately, gone. So the old figures of Tantra, they didn't sign. It was a text, normally Shiva speaking to Shakti. Who wrote it? We don't know. Where we find the first tantrics, at least the first that I know of, we have in the 7th century the great Padmasambhava, the founder of Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan Tantra. And then around the 9th to 12th century we have the age of the Mahasiddhas and the age of Kashmirian Shaivism. In that time the kings both in India and in Tibet were very approving of Tantra, and the main figures of Tantra in that period are the greatest in Tibet is Padmasambhava, the second Buddha as he's called, and the greatest in India is called Abhinavagupta. Both his parents were spiritual masters and they conceived him in a state of samadhi. They were both experiencing cosmic consciousness. They made a ritual to bring Shiva on earth, basically, and that's Abhinavagupta. And then Kshema Raja and Utpala Deva, they are the three main figures of the Tantrism of Kashmir. And in the Tantric Buddhism of Tibet, we can also speak about, or basically first started with the two Indians, Tilopa and Naropa, and then after that we have the great Marpa and Milarepa that turned in time into right-hand tantrics. The lineage started left-hand and they were practicing Tantra also sexually, and it moved gradually. Milarepa himself was abstinent. Yes, these are some. There are many, but there.
What do you mean left hand, right hand? Could you talk about that a bit more?
So the left-hand Tantra, which is called Vama Marga, they are practicing, to the obvious part, is that they are practicing sexual practices. Yeah? And they are tantrics right hand, like many currents. You can see if they have hair or not. If the monks are shaved heads, they are not practicing sexually. And if they have long hair, like the lineage of, there are 4 lineages in Tibet, some have long hair, some have short hair. Those with long hair, they're still practicing sexually.
The hippies and the non-hippies.
Exactly. So the hippie monks, they're still practicing sexually outside. And the ones of the right hand, in meditation, they are visualizing or they are entering certain astral worlds where they make love to divine dakinis and deities over there. But that's just the outer part. There's a much deeper inner perception. The left-hand Tantra starts from the individual and discovers the universal. Yeah, so in an individual woman, in an individual man, in an individual lovemaking, you transfigure, you see beyond. That's not just a kiss, it's a divine kiss. It's not just an embrace, it's not just love, it's all love. It's not just her beauty, it's all beauty, and so forth. And from the individual, you find the universal. That's the left-hand Tantra. Whereas in the right-hand Tantra, they go the other way. They don't touch so much this world. They look at the divine principles and then gradually see how they can descend it into their life. Eventually, you would have to do both. They are like two halves of a circle. But that's the essence of the left-hand and right-hand currents of Tantra.
Okay.
Yes.
And, I mean, there's so much to cover, but when I was thinking about asking you about some of the foundational ideas or principles or philosophies in Tantra, I think it's probably worthwhile now to talk a little bit about polarity and Shiva and Shakti. So, who the hell are Shiva and Shakti? Yes. Why is it important? Why should we care? What is polarity?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, there was a list of questions there. Yes. So let's start with the last question. Polarity is, in Tantra, it says that every force in the universe can be extracted or essentialized into polarity. Without polarity, there is no energy in the universe. The reason why there is energy, the reason why things move, is because they have different poles. Yeah? The gravity works, or the force of gravity works, because you have a certain object with a certain mass and another one, and they pull each other. That's a form of polarity. In electromagnetic fields, is even more clear, plus and minus. If your battery, the plus and minus are 0, the battery doesn't work. So the entire universe is empowered through polarity.
And does that mean that everything has a polar essence?
Yes, everything has a polar essence except in Tantra, the divine absolute. There's one big zero. If you are in that zero, you are in perfect transcendence.
And can we call that God?
Yes, yes. You can say the transcendental God, yeah, because God in manifestation, because God is in Tantra is also everything and is also beyond. So God, which is everything, is also polar, and then there is God beyond, which is perfectly zero. It is perfectly transcendental. Yes. So this game of polarity is the gateway to energy. And Tantra is very much the path of energy. If you want to distinct Tantra from other spiritual paths, other spiritual traditions and spiritual schools, it is the school in which energy is of the most or of the highest important. Yeah, there is no other school, also in Taoism, for example, but not to that degree. In Tantra, you work all the time with energy. You have a problem of confidence, well, there is an energy of confidence. Attract that energy. The psychology and all that important. Have some, read some, understand some, good. But the energy of confidence, boom, you're done. Accumulate that energy. And how you play with energy? Through polarity. Yeah. So now to come to Shiva and Shakti, the Tantrics have essentialized the two poles. Yeah, so the poles can manifest, like we say, in a magnetic current, in an electric current, in sexual attraction, in gravity, in all sorts of forces we can find polarity. But all the polarity can be essentialized into two main elements. And that is the masculine, which is in Tantra consciousness, and the feminine, which is in Tantra energy. And these two, they attract each other, and from their love-making game, it is written in the ancient texts, from the love game of Shiva, the masculine consciousness, and Shakti, the feminine energy, the universe is continuously created. If they would stop to make love, poof, it would disappear. Like in cartoons, the universe would instantaneously disappear. Yeah, also in the Jewish tradition, there's a quote by our friend Leonard Cohen. He says, if Adam and Eve are not looking at each other, God doesn't sit on his throne. Yeah? So if there isn't a fundamental polarity, there's nothing. Yeah? That's the idea on the metaphysical level in Tantra. Practically, yeah, should we take it to a practical degree?
Sure.
So practically, once you learn to play the game of polarity correctly, your energy will harmonize. You will learn how to move big energies with very small, elegant gestures. Yeah, so you will, once you understand, for example, you have an emotion, yeah, or a desire. Normally, or emotions and desires, they are the feminine, they are energy, they are movement, they are change. Normally, when people have an emotion or a desire, they search to act on it in one way or another. Well, acting is still Shakti, yeah? And it's not necessarily what that emotion needs or what that desire needs. Whereas if you understand Tantra, you have an emotion, and instead of going further outside with the emotion, you bring the other pole. You bring consciousness. And you immerse that emotion in consciousness, in this neutrality. And then that emotion will come to peace. It will enter harmony. Yeah, that's just one example how inside your inner world you take your inner feminine, the emotion or the desire, and you bring to it consciousness. If you become very conscious of your desire, it is not compulsive. You become conscious of your emotion, it's at peace.
Could you give me a practical example of what that would look like in a situation in daily life?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you an example from my life. There was a very stressful situation a few weeks ago in which I had, let's say, reasons to be very anxious. Yeah, some things which are very dear to me could have been taken away from me. And this anxiety was difficult to fall asleep. It would wake up quite early. It was difficult, this feeling of anxiety. Now, at times when I would just follow anxiety unconsciously, it just creates a lot of mental agitation when anxiety is not polarized. But knowing the principles of Tantra, as soon as I had time, I sat and meditated. I think 3 or 4 times for 20 minutes, half an hour, on the anxiety, using also a certain mantra and so forth. But I was just immersing it with consciousness, and more consciousness. And every time I would do that, it would settle. Yeah, it would be like the objective problem is still the same, but it's like it happened 5 years ago. It's already, okay, I acknowledged it inside, in my inner world, even if it happened 2 days ago, it was like it happened 5 years ago. And I was at peace with that. And it wasn't just I imagined I'm at peace. I could fall asleep. I'd have a good night's sleep. I wouldn't wake up so early, and so forth. So, just to give a practical example, the Shakti, or the energy of anxiety, when it had enough of Shiva, enough of consciousness, it settled.
And when you talk about being very conscious of it, do you mean, for example, focusing on the bodily sensations associated with your anxiety, or?
Yes. So emotions usually appear in a double way. There is the story of the emotion, the story of the anxiety, and the physical sensation, the energetical vibration. If you don't have one of them, if you just have a physical sensation, you wouldn't call it an emotion. And also if you just have some thoughts and you don't feel anything in your body, that's also not an emotion. So only when these two appear and somehow feed each other, the more it vibrates, the more your mind gets agitated. The more your mind gets agitated, the more the body enters this particular vibration of that emotion. So yes, to observe the emotion is to observe both. It's very different when you look at a thought instead of feeding it. So I would observe, these are the thoughts that I have concerning the anxiety. And when I have these thoughts, this is how it feels in the body. And then by the practice of meditation, you will see that if you really meditate on it, the emotions have a vibrations which also exceeds the feeling of the body, and it goes in your energetical structure. And then to dive into that. And it simply tends to go in its proper way. It's like when food is not digested in the stomach, and then you digest it, and then you feel that, okay, it's done. Yeah, this is the way that I do. Yeah, this is how to look at emotions. Mm-hmm.
It's been 18 minutes now, and we haven't talked about sex yet, which is probably a record for a discussion.
For a discussion about
because
Tantra.
I mean, it's.
Oh, we mentioned it with the
we
left
did.
hand, right hand.
That's right.
But just to mention. Yes.
Well, I mean, I told you earlier, one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation and share this conversation is, it's my feeling that Tantra is the least understood and most poorly represented spiritual tradition in the world. If you Google Tantra, the amount of, to my mind, crap you find is kind of astounding, given how incredibly rich and valuable this tradition can be. Well, maybe I'll start with a very open-ended question. Even in your life, get as personal or not as you want. I mean, what are some of the main misconceptions out there about Tantra as you see them, or what are the false ideas people have about this tradition? And perhaps what distinguishes what you're interested in and what you teach from some of the Neo-Tantra movement? Mm-hmm. Take that question however you like.
Okay. So I feel the deepest misconception about Tantra is that it brings a certain subconscious, partying, reckless, irresponsible sexuality. Yeah, that is a kind of hippie, druggy form of sexuality.
Everyone's banging everyone.
Exactly.
Right.
It's like, okay, the parents are out for good. It's a new generation.
The parents are never coming home again.
Never coming home again. And we can express our lowest desires and ring a bell and play some incense and read some poetry in the beginning and in the end and call it Tantra. Well, it's very far from the truth. The discipline that's needed for Tantric sexuality, especially for the guys, but as you will see also for the women in the long term, the discipline is immense. And the goal is, the pleasure is not the goal of Tantra, it's an instrument. Yeah, so pleasure is not a sin, it's not a problem, but it's not a goal.
Any kind of pleasure, not just sexual pleasure.
Any kind of
right.
pleasure. Pleasure is a tool. Whereas in other traditions, pleasure is a very dangerous thing if you cannot handle it with care. In other traditions, they say, okay, just stay away from pleasure. Stay completely away from pleasure, like the Desert Fathers of early Christianity, or stay moderately away from pleasure, like most traditions. People who are seriously practicing, they kind of avoid it because it's very tempting. Tantra says pleasure is not good, not bad. It's an energy. You can ride that energy and use it as a spiritual tool. So the way, or the easiest way to attain extreme pleasure is through sexuality. And that particular pleasure can expand your consciousness once it's controlled, and it's a wild horse. Pleasure generally and sexual pleasure particularly. Once it's controlled, pleasure can take you to very, very elevated states of consciousness. Pleasure in its nature is very relaxing. It creates a natural state, if it's a very profound pleasure, a natural state of expansion of consciousness. When you feel a lot of pleasure, it's like your borders are dissolving. In a state of orgasm, which is like the peak of pleasure, orgasm, the meaning of the word, comes from breaking through your limits. You're able to go beyond your ego through pleasure. Any extreme experience can take you beyond your ego, but pleasure is easier. Also a great fear. There's the yogis that live in cemeteries. Fine, if you have that courage, do that. There is the intensity of extreme austerities. Fine, fast. But it's also possible to do it through pleasure. But you need to stay on top of the horse and not let the horse ride you. Yeah, this is the thing about Tantric, or the essence of Tantric sexuality. Now, the wonderful thing about it is that it transforms your sexuality from something that is gross, that might be conflictual, that might be selfish, shameful, greedy, violent, unconscious, something that maybe you're afraid of. It turns all these negative things associated to sexuality into something wonderful. So whenever you feel sexual, you feel peace in your heart. You feel love. You feel selfless. You feel care. It's natural. When sexuality, like when you practice Tantric sexuality for a while, your sexuality becomes pure. It's no longer a burden. It's a resource. Yeah, it's like people that had problems with food and all the time they would binge and starve and vomit and I don't know what. And then you harmonize your relationship with food and you only eat the most healthy food that your body needs, and every time you eat you feel pleasure and you are drawn to all the food that's good for you. Well, practicing Tantric sexuality already in the middle stages before you become a Buddha, yeah, but already in the first stages of Tantra, your sexuality becomes healthy. You will only engage in sexual experiences which are good for you and good for the other person, good for you emotionally, spiritually, good for you today and good for you in a year. Yeah, it gives this wholeness, this beauty into sexuality. That's even in the early stages, even after a year or two of practicing Tantra, having a good supportive yoga practice, this is what will happen. Yes.
Yeah, you used a phrase that I really like, and I think it's very succinct and apt. Sexuality as a resource.
Yes.
As an energetic resource, as a spiritual resource, yes. Whatever. That idea is, I think, very foreign to a lot of people, but I would say particularly to a lot of men. You know, I've met men, I'm sure you have too, guys who have to masturbate, for example, every day, or they say they're edgy and they, or some guys who need it to sleep or whatever. And I'll never forget, I think it was a David Data book I read when I was 18 or 19. And he spoke about, and I'm, again, I've always had a very high sex drive. I've always really loved women. And I remember he wrote in the book, when you see a beautiful woman on the street, breathe deeply through your whole body. Let that energy fill you. Let it be a good thing. Let it give you energy. Not in a you're wanting to have sex with everything that moves way, but just as in like you're walking in the park and you see beautiful trees. You see, yes. Whatever. Getting energy from, the eternal feminine, and that changed my life. You walk around all day feeling energized because there's just such enormous beauty everywhere you go. It's this endless, abundant resource. And you really feel it, like when you're cut off from that resource. Like we were at the retreat, and when we were separated for 3 days, you really feel it, But this idea is so powerful, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we might as well talk about it now. I mentioned that I think Tantra is the most poorly represented spiritual tradition, present company excluded, in the world. I think the best kept secret in sex that boggles my mind how few men know it is that orgasm for men is different from ejaculation. They're two distinct things. Men are capable of full body, multiple orgasms without ejaculation. This blows so many men's minds, as you know better than just about anyone. If you could talk a little bit about sexual continence for men, why it's important, and what it actually looks like in practice, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, so to touch first on the point that you mentioned, yes, there are two distinct functions. The function of ejaculation is related to the sympathetic autonomic system. It is the impulse for it comes from somewhere along the spine. It's a very basic instinctual action. The orgasm comes from the brain, from the accumbens, and it has a very particular, very different, is related to the parasympathetic, to this relaxing part of the body, different hormones, different everything. These two, along evolution, were associated. There was a mutation of a man who associated these two, ejaculation and orgasm. And this guy would ejaculate more. Ejaculating more, had more offsprings, and eventually is the vast majority of guys that have that. Now, if our sole goal in life is to procreate, very good. Keep them associated and have hundreds and thousands of children. Fine. But if you have other goals in life than just procreation, this can be dissociated. And it takes some practice.
Orgasm and ejaculation.
Orgasm and ejaculation can be dissociated. Can be dissociated completely. And yes, it takes some practice. For guys, you learn, first of all, the first stage is the desert. You learn how not to ejaculate, and your joy of sexuality for that part of practice, for the desert part, that can be weeks, but for some guys even months, is without orgasm. You enjoy very much, a lot of empathy, you're very strong and very virile, you can make love for hours, but you don't enter the area, what we call in Tantra, the non-return point. You don't get to a degree of pleasure that would before provoke ejaculation. Once you've mastered this stage for a while, you basically using very specific meditation, breathing techniques and yoga techniques, you learn to harness, like you said before, you learn to use the sexual energy, and it spreads. So you would feel sexuality not just in your genitals, but throughout your body. And as the container of sexuality grows through the specific practices, you are able to have wonderful orgasms in time. And they are, they are incomparable to the orgasms that you had before. You can have an orgasm for 3 minutes, for 5 minutes, for 7 minutes. And it's like, it's never ending, and it's like this infinity sign. It apparently diminishes and then it feeds itself again. And apparently diminishes and feeds itself again. And what is like, there's this American expression, it's good for what held you. Yeah, it just detensionizes the 5 minutes of orgasm. No matter what was holding you before, you feel completely reborn.
I know someone's listening to this right now, yes, saying, come on, 5 minutes of orgasm?
Yeah, 5 minutes of orgasm I can share from my experience. And yeah, once you get it as a guy, it's sometimes even easier than for women to have an orgasm. And yes, you can do it many, many times. But there is a desert before, where the desert is filled with graves of guys that tried and didn't succeed. Yeah, because it takes sometimes weeks, sometimes months, in which you have to invest, you have to do a very good daily practice. It's wonderful. I mean, you feel very energized already in the time of the desert, but you don't have an orgasm for a few months. And you have to pass through that. Most guys, some guys are extremely talented and boom, they're there. Or guys who are very, very in love with their girlfriend, also sometimes they just enter immediately to orgasms. But for most guys, it takes that step. And if you are strong enough and man enough to follow the desert, you will find the oasis beyond the desert. And yes, it's absolutely amazing. Every orgasm has its particular nuance, and you learn in time to meditate in the states of orgasm, and you can have fantastic spiritual states that even 20 years of meditation would not get you there. Yes.
Yeah, you said something to that effect in a lecture, and it kind of caught me off guard. You said something to the effect, and forgive me if I'm misquoting you, that you can achieve somewhat higher states in Tantric sexuality than you can through meditation. Yes. And the meditator in me was like, whoa, easy. Yes. But would you mind sort of unpacking that a bit?
Yes. So, especially for women, especially also for men, but for women it's much more accessible. If a woman has a man that loves her, and they have a lot of mutual love, and he's very continent in the sense that he doesn't ejaculate and he can make love for a long time, and they make love for 2-3 hours, and she has a series of orgasms, and like I emphasize again, and they're very in love. Yeah, it doesn't really work without the ingredient of love. Then she will start to have tremendous spiritual experiences. I've met personally women that entered states of cosmic consciousness, had astral projection, supramental states, met all sorts of divine beings. In the lovemaking, I was present in the bedroom for some of these experiences. It's absolutely mind-blowing. The energy gets so divine. If you remember from what we spoke about polarity, the energy gets so high that the consciousness is attracted to it. And then the state of consciousness leaps or gradually ascends into places that never been before. And it's not just, the idea is not just, okay, now we're tripping with spiritual experiences. These experiences, they stand as landmarks. It's like you see the world from the top of the mountain, and it will influence the rest of your life if you digest it correctly, if you understand, and you have some initiations of what actually happened there. It can change 1 or 2 or 5 such experiences can literally change your life, and you will take a direction that's much more aligned with who you are, and so forth. Yes, and that's what it's about. It's, meditation practice is safer. It's clear cut. But it's wonderful. I meditate 2 hours every day since I don't know when. It's wonderful, and it needs to be combined with Tantra. But the Tantric path, because it involves such a fiery energy when it comes to sexuality, can go even faster, but much less safe. There's many things that can go wrong in the Tantric, and it's very, very subtle. You lose the love. Very dangerous. You have to stop.
Could you talk a bit more about that, when things going wrong? Because that's another question I want to ask you. Some of the, I don't know if we can call them dangers of Tantra, but something like that.
Yes. Tantra is not, meditation is quite safe. Tantra is not so safe. And that's one of the reasons why Tantra remains so hidden. Because it cannot, you cannot read 2 books about Tantra for most people, and then start practicing and get to the very, very high tops of Tantra. You can get somewhere. But from a certain point, the nuances are so refined, and Tantra is called walking on the blade of the knife. It's a very short path, but very dangerous. All these nuances, many things can go wrong. Once you attain through Tantra a lot of power, with power comes responsibility. You don't take that responsibility, you misuse the power to, I don't know what, sleep around or get rich or hurt other people or deal with some, I don't know what, appreciation issues that you have in a very silly way, then that huge energy will explode in your face. Yeah? Because in most traditions you grow in consciousness and then in energy. In Tantra you grow in consciousness, you grow in energy. You grow in consciousness, you grow in energy. And the rights and wrongs in Tantra, even they are very firm and very clear, they are principles. They are not dogmas. Yes, you can have, for example, multiple partners if you want in Tantra. But you need to love. But how to check if you love? You can make things much worse if you have polyamory and there's no love anywhere. Or in one relationship, you have 4 relationships, 1 you don't love. Disaster. Yeah? So the game in Tantra is always at the level of intention. You can do all sorts of things which will appear almost crazy for ordinary people if it comes from the right intention. Yes, the great Tantric master Ramakrishna, he saw the goddess Kali in a cat, and he would feed the cat as if it was with the offerings. People bring offerings to the goddess. He was the main priest, and he would feed the cat. They wanted to kill him, but he saw Kali in the cat, so it was all right. It's a terrible sin, apparently, but not in his case, because he actually saw it. So it's very, very refined. And then if a person who doesn't have the inner state would take the offerings of Kali and feed it to another cat, or to the same cat, but not with the right intention, terrible sin. Yeah? So this is how it is. It would be very easy for Tantra to become dogmatic, to create a Tantric society with very strict rules and so forth. But it would kill the message. It would dry out the essence of Tantra. So Tantra stayed with all the do's and don'ts at the level of principle, at the level of you can do this and that if you have the attitude. How do we know if you have the attitude? You know if you have the attitude. And because of that, it's very, very dangerous. Yeah? If you are on the path of abstinence, you kissed a woman, clear, you're off the path. If you're on the path of Tantra, is only if inside your attitude has become selfish, then you're out. But who can see that? Who can prove that?
One of the things I really like about Tantra is the fact that there isn't a ton of dogma at all. But could you give some examples of some of the do's and don'ts principles that you're talking about? I think that would be good.
Yes. So no violence. Yeah, it's very, very clear. And it's the same like the yamas and niyamas in yoga. And being completely truthful. Making a continuous effort. So in Tantra, it's not in many traditions it's described, you make an effort today and retire later. Spiritual retirement. Yeah? You do, and then you're there on the golden throne and you do nothing and you stay, you're in the highest level. You can absolutely not go higher.
You're enlightened.
You're
over.
You're enlightened, game over. Now you can retire and receive every month your
spiritual pension.
Spiritual pension. Yes, you don't need to work spiritually anymore. In Tantra is not like that. A spiritual master is the one who is evolving the fastest. The higher you go in Tantra, the faster you evolve, the bigger the efforts that you make. The greatest Tantric masters would still, at the age of 90, if you look at the life of Milarepa, would still make tremendous spiritual efforts. Or Sri Aurobindo, to take a modern Tantric, very old age, he would still burn to grow and to transform. It's a continuous transformation.
There's no finish line.
There's no finish line. Yeah, the finish line is that when you stop resisting transformation, when it stops bothering you, that's the finish line. But it doesn't mean that they rest in peace. No, it's live in peace, grow in peace, rather. Yeah? The universe is growing in Tantra. The universe is evolving. A spiritual master is growing as fast as the universe. You evolve as fast as the universe evolves, because it's still improving itself. So in the same way. So we had non-violence, being truthful, making a continuous effort, maintaining a purity and a certain selflessness, and growing continuously in love. The text, I don't remember, one of the tantras, possibly Kularnava Tantra, says when love becomes infinite, the impossible becomes easily possible. The main energy that we work with in Tantra is love. There is this wonderful book of Erich Fromm, The Art of Love, that you can love more. And in Tantra you can love much, much, much more. And you charge your entire life with a tremendous amount of love, and then more love, and then more love. And there's this quote of Saint Augustine that says, love and do whatever you feel like. Once love comes to such an intensity, the energy, the experience of love becomes so big inside of you, everything that you would do would be right. And there's so many tantric techniques, and every tantric practitioner, that's one of the main things that you do. You learn to love more and more and more, and with a higher and higher intensity. And that's what keeps you safe on the path. And if you feel for 3 days your heart is dry and you didn't love, that's a big alarm sign.
And when you talk about love, you're not just talking about the love that we might have for an intimate partner, right?
Yeah, the love for everything. Yes, the love for nature and for your friends, and the love for yourself. Yes, the love for your partner, the love for your family, for humanity, for the entirety of the universe, the love for God. That has to come. And if you look, if as a tantric you say, okay, this is 2018. In 2017, how much love I had in my heart. In 2018, I have the same. Something is wrong. The path is not working. This is not a good. Something in your system is not working. Every year, every month, you need to learn to love more. There's no other way. And this is the, how to say, we said Tantra is dangerous. This is your way to stay safe. If you continue to grow in love, because you grow in everything else, and you get very, very strong. You get strong in charisma, you get strong physically, you get strong sexually, you get strong on the vital level. And in order to balance that, you need to balance strength with goodness. How do you do that? With love. So you have to continuously grow. You grow in concentration, you grow in focus, in efficiency, you grow in willpower. All that's wonderful, but can easily deviate. How do you not deviate? By growing continuously in love. That's the ultimate safety belt in Tantra. Yes.
I'd like to get practical for a moment, because I don't think we've talked much about yoga. How does yoga fit into this? why is it so important to this path?
Yes, they are intertwined. So Tantra is Tantra Yoga. The Tantric tradition and Yoga tradition have developed simultaneously, and you cannot really distinct who is who. Yeah, the methods are so intertwined. The Hatha Yoga system was formed by Tantrics, by Matsyendra Natha and Goraksha Natha. The Nathas are one of the lineages of Tantrics, so the actual Hatha Yoga that everyone is doing today, the physical yoga, was formed by Tantrics in the 14th century. So yoga is one of the, when it's practiced in a Tantric way, it's one of the best ways to do your energy work daily inside. Yes, and this is the essence. Once the yoga was created, it was created as a ladder. The physical techniques of yoga, they are a ladder to get us step by step to higher and higher states of meditation, to higher and higher states in lovemaking, to higher and higher states of devotion. So they reprogram our energetical system. When yoga is practiced correctly in a meditative way, the physical postures and breathing exercises, they are transforming our emotions, our mind, our concentration, our vital level. This is what Hatha Yoga is about, and it's without it, Tantra will be almost impossible.
And you, just to give some context, how much yoga do you do on an average day, would you say?
5 hours.
5 hours?
Yeah, 5 hours of yoga and meditation every day. Yeah, for the past 17, now coming to 18 years. Yes, some days I do more, but most days 5 hours. Yes, and without it, it would be just talking about these things and being frustrated of not being able to actually live them. It is the practice that's...
Do you think that every tantric has to block out 5 hours of their day to embark on this path, though?
I feel that the path of Tantra, you need to give it 24 hours. You cannot give it 5 hours. You have to give everything that you have once you decide it's your path. But of course, you don't just jump into it because you heard one lecture. So you play. Yeah, you play with the path. You do 15 minutes of yoga, you do half an hour, you do an hour. You start with sexual continence, you play like that. But once you feel this is what you want in life, then it takes your entirety of life. And yes, 5 hours I sit on the mat, but when I drive on the bike and when I'm talking to you now, and whatever I do, there is an integration. It is done with a specific intention. It is, let's say, surfacing up certain things which are a part of the path. Yeah, this conversation and everything that we do now is a part of the path.
So you would consider having conversation with me, eating dinner, as part of your tantric path?
Possibly, yeah. Right. Sometimes, I'll not lie or exaggerate. Sometimes I'm just eating or just watching a movie. But sometimes I sit and watch a movie, and throughout the movie I do exercises of consciousness so that I can savor a movie to an ecstatic degree. Yeah, I savor my inner world and the movie at the same time. I meditate. I don't just watch the movie. I meditate. It can be a stupid movie. Easier when the movie is interesting, but can be a stupid movie. I've seen my teachers, how they watch a film and why they insist. We all go, well, why to watch a film? Yeah, I've seen them and I've studied them, how they look. And the movie itself becomes a spiritual experience, becomes an experience of absorption. It's very easy not to think of anything else but the movie. When you do it with the meditation, it's quite difficult. But when you sit 2 hours in front of a movie, normally, if the movie is good, you don't think about other things. Well, you can do that consciously by deliberately focusing on the movie. And then the movie, I come out, I'm walking there in the cinema, I feel my consciousness as big as the hall, with this utter ecstasy, because I just watched the Avengers. I don't know what. Something for children, something silly, but it doesn't matter. Yeah. But sometimes, I watch a movie and I'm tired or flat and I watch the movie.
That's really interesting, though, because I do what you're talking about with music all the time. But when I watch films, and I love films, but I'm often approaching films from very intellectual, okay, what is the director trying to say here? I'm really trying to piece it all together. What's the message? I'm approaching it from that kind of standpoint. I don't really approach film as meditation. Perhaps I should. That's interesting. Because why haven't I? I mean, I do it with music. I like to do it with art. But that's interesting. Yeah. I'm going to try that.
Yes, to give you an example, in the Tantric tradition, in this tradition of Kashmir, they would prepare all the students, the advanced students, for 1 year they would prepare a theater show. And they would play the show once. And the audience would be the master. Just that. And they would go into ecstasy while displaying the theater show. Of course, it was very meaningful. One would play Ganesh, and one would play Shiva, and then for a year he would meditate for that 2 hours or 3 hours of the show to be Shiva. And the master would look at them, just look, and they would enter ecstasy. And there's a very big chapter, almost as big as sexuality, to put it in context, about admiring art in Tantra and how to admire art. And there's camps in Europe, in our school, and some of our teachers, that's what they teach. How to contemplate art in a tantric way and to enter spiritual ecstasy, looking at a statue, looking at an artwork, listening to... Of course, music is the ultimate, From all the forms of art, it is touching the highest, But also with a film, also with theater, and so forth.
I'm going to look into that more because that's something that comes pretty naturally to me. I'm not saying that I'm a spiritual master by any means, but that's always something I really love to do, is just totally immerse yourself in it and use music as meditation.
Yes, so you can see the teacher that gives it from our school is called Adinata. He's giving a few camps a year, and the texts were written by Abhinavagupta, one of the greatest tantric masters. He's quoted in when you study aesthetics in university and so forth. He's quoted there as one of the greatest philosophic minds of aesthetics and of savoring arts and so forth. Even mainstream recognizes him. But beyond the mainstream, he gives some very clear methods. Yes.
Let's, before we run out of time, we still have a bit of time, but I'd like to talk a little more about Tantric sexuality and how that can play out in long-term relationships. Because we live in an era now when I think a lot of people are experimenting with various forms of relationship arrangements that are not strictly monogamous. Obviously, the divorce rate is over 50%, and the divorce rate for people who remarry is something like 70% or something. It keeps going up, right, every marriage. And I see, I'm not sure if I'll say Tantra, but, a lot of Tantric ideas about masculine, feminine polarity and sexual continence and sexuality as a spiritual tool that, to my mind, can have an enormously beneficial impact on long-term relationships. Can really be a game changer in that sense. If you're someone who struggles with monogamy, we'll say, or if you're someone who gets quote-unquote bored in relationships, I think this path is really the antidote to that in so many ways. So I'll just say briefly, I mean, again, I'm speaking because I'm a guy and that's my experience, but I think when you're engaged in tantric lovemaking, the urge afterward is not, at least for me, it's not to run away. It's certainly not to fall asleep. I mean, the amount of energy you get from that, and inspiration, and just you feel like you can do anything. You feel you want to show up in the world as a man in a way that I never have before. And your delight in your partner is not lessened; it's amplified. I mean, you just want to just dive into the ocean of that person even more. After lovemaking, it's very, very, very different from the standard model of, have 10 minutes if you're lucky, ejaculate and then go to sleep. It's very, very different. And it can have a really beautiful effect on the closeness that you experience with your partner and the relationship more generally. There's a lot to cover here, but we talked a little bit about polarity, but what are the benefits of tantric sex in long-term relationships as you see them? Like, why is this a good thing?
Yes. Yeah. Now, humanity is not managing many things correctly. Yeah, we don't manage our garbage, we don't manage our ecology, we don't manage our wars, we don't manage our politics very well. But certainly, relationship is one of the biggest problems, and the problem comes from a misconception, or many misconceptions of relationship. Whereas, if you look at traffic laws, for example, they're pretty good. Yeah, we kind of learned, okay, if we put green on all the stoplights together,
Although we're in
accidents.
Thailand, so I'm gonna maybe in Israel or Canada.
Yes, yeah, but still,
they're still pretty good.
It's logical. It makes sense. Yeah, so one has red, one has green. One passes, one stops. Nobody kills each other. Yeah, we have some accidents, but not 50% like with the divorce rate. Yeah, 1 out of 1,000 or 10,000. Good. So obviously, from the data that you quoted, if we have 50% divorce rate, and it's not like the other 50% are fully happy, the one that stayed married, either they are good friends or they got used to each other, like a back pain for the kids and for the mortgage, or some are happy. I'm not saying there are happy couples, and there are people, but normally they figured it out themselves, or they had some very good guides and so forth. But the majority of people have very profound misconceptions about relationship. Otherwise, the relationship would work. Yeah. Now, in Tantra, the understanding of polarity, what's the masculine, what's the feminine, what makes the masculine stay in a relationship, what makes a guy stay in is a very big question. Yeah. What attitude from the woman would make the guy stay? This is $1 million question. Well, read the Tantras. It's very precisely described there. A woman, if she stays in that state that she is in the beginning of the relationship, if she stays that in love, that feminine, that open, that ever new, because it's a feminine quality. Women can be always ever new. It's a part of their nature. That's femininity. If she stays in that place, the guy would be totally and continuously fascinated by her, and he will rediscover her, as I personally feel now 5 years of a relationship, or coming to 5 years, because my woman is all crazy. She's all new. She's all unpredictable, and she's so madly in love with me, and as a result, I'm also madly in love with her. Now, for the guy, the fundamental understanding is that you are the pillar, you are the center of the relationship. And if you want a relationship, you assume that role. Most guys feel like they enter the relationship and they want the burden to be carried equally. The burden of responsibility, of decision making, of being aware. All that they wanted today carried equally. That's not very masculine, and it will destroy the relationship. If you understand as a guy that it's your role, the woman brings the change, she brings the color, she brings the unexpected. The guy gives the solid, responsible structure. You are the base, you are the pillar. And once you understand that, want it or not, if you want a relationship that's functioning, stay there, you will see that your woman, instead of being nasty and nagging and annoying, she will become the same amazing woman that she was in the beginning. So if you take your role as the center, as the responsible, lucid, awake consciousness of the relationship, as the unchanging, unbreakable, you're an elephant who can hit you from all sides, you're still walking north. Yeah? And she assumes or reassumes the role that she had in the beginning of being life. The relationship will not just stay the same like you had in the first few months. You will fall in love stronger. This falling in love of the first few months that everybody longs for, that's just the opening spot. Relationships get much better. With Blandine, with my lover, I don't think there is a day in which I am not put into tears from the love and from the gratitude of having such a miraculous woman in my life, because she plays her role and I'm doing my best to play my role. And in this way, we just feed each other. I feed her femininity by being a man, and she feeds my masculinity by being a woman. And then that feeds, again, it's a positive spiral. Then I become even more masculine. She becomes even more feminine. And it's just ad infinitum. It just continues to grow that way. Of course, we have our fallouts, we have our fights, we have our tensions. I chicken out, she dries out, all that. We do have all these things, but at least we know where we're going. We have the information and we know where to put the free resources that we have in making the relationship better.
One of the things you said in I think one of the first times I heard you speak, you said Tantra doesn't care about political correctness.
Yes.
And I like that a lot. And I know what you're saying because I've been around you, I've been around your lover, and I've been around the school a little bit. But I know some people will listen to this and think, well, what the hell is he talking about? He's talking about some kind of 1950s patriarchal model of relationships. I mean, I know your partner. She's an enormously strong, big, like big presence. Like she's not a meek little by any means. And you use the word equal, and I'm not sure maybe there's a better word. Like the way I look at it is absolutely equal in the relationship, but different, right? Playing different roles, right? I just think it's worthwhile to make that distinction.
Yes, and it's not, you don't enter these roles as a dogma. You don't enter these roles, you play, but you don't, you enter the essence of it. As a guy, you simply keep the lights on all the time. That's just, as soon as you turn off the lights, you become unconscious, you become automatic. Know that your relationship will crash.
That's such an important idea. And could you unpack that a little more? Keep the lights on always. What do you mean?
Yes.
Even just practical examples.
Yeah, so guys have this tendency, everyone has it, but guys more. I want to go on autopilot. I want to zone out. You come to your woman and yesterday worked, and then you do the same thing you did yesterday, like a robot. Yesterday she was melting from the flowers and the poem and all that. Today she doesn't feel anything because you are not there. You're just replaying and you're sleeping inside. You kiss her. Yesterday or 5 minutes ago, you kissed her with all your heart. You were there, you were savoring it fully. And now you kiss her and you're thinking of something else. You do that a lot and she'll bite your head off. It's good that she bites your head off because it reminds you to stay awake. You understand? Yeah, so that's what it's about. It's like you let go gradually but completely. You move towards letting go completely of this aspiration or this wish, this desire to fall asleep in autopilot. It's not, okay, I find the formula and now the robots are working for me. Yeah, the mental robots and everything is happening automatically and I just zone out. Not in Tantra.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the chapter in The Way of the Superior Man by David Data. Stop hoping for completion of anything in life, right? We have that kind of instinct, like if I just make enough money, or if I just solve this one problem in my relationship, she'll leave me alone. Yes. If I just sort of this one issue with my friend will be, everything will be good. And then, but it never ends, right? It never ends. But that's such a masculine instinct, just wanting to just break free. And why do we watch sports, right? We break free, there's all this struggle, we break free, and then we score a goal and we can rest, it's over. But then the next play starts and it all starts again, right? Yeah, I think that, it's again, that was another one of those game-changing moments for me because I saw so much of myself in those pages. It was like, yes, that's me. I'm hoping for a completion of all these things, and I'm waiting in vain. That will never come. Yes. Yeah, life doesn't get easier in that sense.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, but your resistance to life gets smaller.
Yes.
As this aspiration diminishes, you're just happy to have a challenge. And you find, instead of finding, you have your moment of challenge when you're stressed and somehow vigilant, and then moments in which you are peaceful but somehow unconscious, you learn to bring the two good parts together. And inside the challenge, you stay relaxed and detached. It's another one of 1,000 challenges. And when you rest, you stay vigilant. You rest in meditation. Yeah, you don't just rest unconscious. Right. Yeah, that's where we're going to.
And again, there's so much to cover. There's so much that I could ask you. But while we're talking about relationships, in tantric relationships, there is a lot of emphasis put on sexuality and having a fair amount of sex. There's the old, the cliche that tantrics have 12-hour,
Yes.
lovemaking sessions. How important is that, do you think, to tantric relationships, like carving out regular amounts of time to make love?
Yes. So in our relationship, when we have control over our schedule, we make love 4 or 5 times a week, about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Because we have each one 5 hours of practice and a whole school to run and all sorts of projects and writing workshops and so forth. When we have more time, then normally we stay with 4 or 5 times a week, but we do 3-4 hours, or even 5 hours. And you see, if you make love, even let's say twice a week, 2-3 times a week, 2 hours, 2-3 times a week, your life will not dry out. You will stay creative. You will stay alive. Or you will not be able to make love so long. If you did dry out, you don't know what to do there in the bedroom after 20 minutes. So it keeps you extremely alive. And we spoke before about growing in love. That's the way. You are making love. That's the best way to grow in love, is to make love to someone you really, really love. And following all the sequence of the tantric lovemaking, you grow in love. And it's like a rebirth every time. You're just reborn after every lovemaking, and it's overwhelmingly beautiful. It leads to such amazing spiritual states. There was one retreat in my life. We were making love. So we did about 10 to 11 hours of yoga and meditation and 3 hours of lovemaking every day for a month. And then once a week we would do a 24-hour meditation. And that stayed. That was September, I think, until December, January. This elevated state of consciousness was just there. I remember walking up the stairs or going to the toilet or doing physical labor, and that ecstasy was just continuously, month and month, it stayed after as an impact. Yeah, so it's up to that degree as an effect. Yes.
Well, what about for single people? If someone is single, wanting to embark on this path, do you have any general, because I think a lot of people would listen to what you're saying and think, oh, well, I need a partner to have all of this. What advice would you give single people who want to embark on this path?
Yes. So you take the practices of Tantric Yoga and Tantric meditation and you elevate yourself. It's actually a very big opportunity when you're single. Yeah, because doing that, you will attract a much higher partner. Yeah, and something that fits you, fits your inner nature, much, much more. And you take that period, and it's important to have such periods in life. Yeah, so you take that period as an intense ascending period. You just do a lot of spiritual practice. If it's a month, if it's 3 years, if it's 5 years, doesn't matter. And the higher you will raise yourself, the higher will be the relationship that you enter. The more you will have to give, the more elevated the partner that you will attract. So yes, you focus then a lot on you build your masculinity or femininity in an elevated way through the meditation and yoga, planting or preparing for a very elevated relationship to come.
And I know we talked about this a little already in the past, but I found it interesting. How did you find Tantra? How did you come to be walking this path? Because you grew up in Israel.
Yeah. So I grew up in a rather atheistic house, and I was quite completely science is God and no spirituality whatsoever, even quite in a demonstrative way. Around the age of 16, with Leonard Cohen and then other poets and writers, I started having a bigger and bigger interest in what's the meaning of life. First with philosophy, and then with Oriental philosophy, and then with spirituality. And at a certain point, it just became the center of my life. Just from reading and trying to meditate from the books, which was a catastrophe, but I tried. I remember in the weekends, very often, I wouldn't sleep because I would interrogate. I would read books and write, what's the meaning of at the age of 16 or 17, what's the meaning of my life? I couldn't live anymore a life which I don't know why, and I couldn't find why. I said, okay, nothing else matters. If I don't know why to go north or why to go east if I don't know where I want to go?
Did you flirt with Nietzsche and nihilism at some point?
Yeah, I read Nietzsche and yes, Albert Camus and all this existential, slightly pessimistic Schopenhauer, yes, Freud and so forth.
And they didn't satisfy you?
No, they satisfied they were good for the search. I mean, they fed the hunger. They made me more hungry to know the meaning of life. That was very good. But the answer, if you look at the life of Nietzsche or the life of Albert Camus, I don't want to be like that. Just have a headache and not to have any friends for my entire life and to be very arrogant. Yeah. The writings are fantastic. But, if I follow that, I will become that. I don't want that. Yeah.
What a damning life account, Mike. Yeah. To have a headache and no friends.
Yeah, exactly. So, yes, I mean, some of the ideas, the questions are very inspiring. The answers, for me, not. Or, like, they need to be stripped. There's something true, especially in Nietzsche. Yeah, there's something true, but needs to be stripped. So, I got to Eastern philosophy, and especially to Buddhism. I was just going mad. I didn't have friends. I didn't have anybody to speak to about these things. Just very, very little. But
and you're still a teenager at this point?
Still a teenager. And then the army, Krishnamurti. Then eventually, every day I would read. And luckily, all Israelis, they go to India after the army.
Yes,
I didn't really know why, but I just followed. You get money from the army, and then I just followed and poured into India. And did some yoga, and after 10 days, I think, in India, I found the school that I'm in now, the teachings that now we are also teaching, and that was the shift for me, because I was studying a lot inside, and then somebody put it there in clear charts. I heard about the chakras, and I felt, as I was passing through different teachers of the school, that yes, this kind of life, like this person, yes, that I want to be. And even the older students, that this is confident, this is calm, this is meaningful, this is loving, this is happy and free, yes, this I want to be. And then having these modules and having the written material and the practice, and I could feel the energy flow and so forth quite from the start. Then I decided to engage in this path. I went to many other different schools, keeping the practice from the Tantric teachings, and eventually after about a year I decided to devote myself to this path completely.
And it's been how long now?
Almost 18 years. Yes.
Wow. Did you ever flirt? Because I mean, it's remarkable. I think we've had very similar backgrounds in some ways with this stuff. Because at one point I flirted, not that seriously, but kind of seriously, about just entering a monastery, foregoing sexuality, foregoing women, foregoing pleasure. Was that ever something you considered?
Yes, already at a very young age, when I was 10 or 11, I remember having this continuous wish to go in Antarctica and to live in the snow by myself. Yeah, it was...
Be the coldest Jew in the world.
Yes, be the coldest Jew in the world. It kept on repeating that I want to be alone in the snow. And having some occasions of working and teaching yoga and studying with monks and teaching monks, I often... no, often is not precise, but once or twice I really burst into tears because this lifestyle is somehow very familiar to my heart, is very familiar to my soul, and I've spent 2.5 years of my life in silence. I would go 3 months a year in retreats, in the snow, in the mountains, to live my childhood dream, and I would just meditate for 12 or 13 hours every day, and in the
Denmark,
night. In Romania.
In Romania.
Yes. And I could live that. I feel this life is not my task. It's not my necessity to do that. And yes, I have tremendous longing for this life. Tremendous longing to live in meditation and in spiritual practice. But now, this life, it's different, and I'm supposed to do something else, and I do it with great joy and enthusiasm. Yes.
That's very apparent.
Yes.
I hope we can talk some other time because there's more I want to ask you. But before I let you go, if someone's listening to this and they just kind of want to dip their toe in the water, perhaps sounds a bit glib, but are there any sort of basic steps or just even 1 or 2 books someone could look to that you think are pretty good on this topic, or a lecturer or a thinker?
Yeah, so first, if you have, I would check the Atman Federation. Because there's schools in maybe 300 cities in the world, and there you can study the same course, like here. And that's the best, because you cannot really workshop spirituality. You cannot do it in a workshop. It needs to be schooled. And that's a weekly course, and it's solid, and it will get you through all the steps of Tantra. So the Atman Federation, that would be my first recommendation. Books-wise, you mentioned David Deida, so The Way of the Superior Man and Dear Lover are very good. If you want to know the scholarly side of Tantra, then Tantra, The Path of Ecstasy by George Feuerstein, scholarly-wise, is the best. If you want to read the life of a Tantric practitioner, a man initiated by a female master, then Daniel Odier, The Tantric Journey, is very wonderful.
Yeah, Radu turned me on to that, and I'm just great. What's the first one about his travels in India? Tantric Quest?
Tantric Quest, yes.
Oh, it's tremendous. Yeah, Daniel Odier.
Yeah, that's very, very good.
And I think that's good too for an absolute, it would be good for an absolute beginner too.
Yes, because he's also a good enough writer. Mm-hmm. Yes, and the Tantras. I would read, if you are a little bit more open and spiritual, I would read the Shiva Sutra, the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. These two, they are the easiest to start with, because the Tantric texts, they hold the power. They were written from a completely different state of consciousness. Yes.
And we can find you in the web. Is it tantrayogathailand.com?
Tantrayogathailand.com.
Tantrayogathailand.com.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to include a link.
Yes, and the Facebook also.
Yes. Okay, so I've been experimenting with this new closing format. Sometimes it's corny, sometimes it's not. I'd like you to complete these sentences with just the first things that come to mind. Sure. The trait I am most drawn to in the opposite sex is?
Vividness.
Vividness?
Yes.
Huh. Love is?
Infinite.
Infinite. I would most like to be remembered as?
Nothing.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you very much, Uriel.
My pleasure.
That was great. That was really great. there you have it, my friends. I hope you enjoyed that. Remarkably, 40-some minutes later, I am still sick, so I will keep this outro short as well. I'll tell you that if you want links to everything Uriel talked about, particularly his recommendations toward the end of our conversation, you can go to humansandlove.com. You'll find show notes and a bunch of information about Tantra. Aside from that, I'll remind you once again that ratings and reviews mean a lot to me, so if you dig the show, please let others know. Leave a rating and review using your podcast app of choice. All right, my friends, I hope you have a tremendous rest of the week. Remember that life is short, far too short to be sick in bed with a cold. Hopefully I'm feeling better when I speak to you again next Tuesday. Talk to you then.